Hello, my name is Jack Bjorkander, and for my presentation, I chose the World Trade Organization. So, also known as the WTO. Uh, the WTO is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and the current head of the organization is Roberto Azevedo, who is a Brazilian national. WTO started as the GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which lasted for almost a half century from 1948 to 1994. The GATT provided the rules for much of the world's trade, and during that same half century, the world saw some of the highest growth rates. However, it was just a provisional agreement and organization, and the original intention was to create a third institution to go along with the Bretton Woods institutions that we learned about in this class, the World Bank and IMF. So 50 nations participated in negotiations to create the International Trade Organization as a specialized agency of the UN. The charter for the ITO, or the International Trade Organization, was to extend beyond world trade disciplines to include rules for employment, commodity agreements, investments, and more. They wanted to create the ITO at the UN Conference on Trade and Employment in Havana in 1947. At that same time, 15 nations were meeting to talk about tariffs following the end of World War II. First round of these talks resulted in a package of trade rules and tariff concessions affecting over $10 billion of trade. These concessions went into effect in June of 1948, and with it, the GATT was born. The same countries were also part of the group negotiating the ITO charter, which was finally agreed upon in March of 1948, but ratification proved impossible in some nations, including the US. In 1950, the US officially announced it was not to sign on to the ITO, effectively killing the organization, leaving only the GATT in place. The GATT remained almost exactly the same over the almost 50 years of its run, with only minor tweaks coming from meetings like the Kennedy Round or the Tokyo Round. It was not until the Uruguay Round, which lasted from 1986 to 1994, that anything really changed. So the GATT did such a good job at reducing tariffs that, along with the economic recessions in the 70s and 80s, it drove countries to find other ways to protect sectors that were facing increased foreign competition. Along with that, high rates of unemployment and factory closures led to nations seeking outside deals and subsidy races to maintain their footholds in trade. These changes undermined the GATT, and on top of this, the original agreement was just no longer relevant to the modern world. Trade had become far more complex than anyone in the 40s could have imagined. The world was becoming globalized. There were services not covered by the GATT rules that were becoming of interest, and investment expanded. There were loopholes that were being exploited, and even the institutional structure and the dispute settlement system within the GATT were causing concern. These and other factors convinced members that a new effort to reinforce and extend the system should be attempted, and because of that, the Uruguay Round, the Marrakesh Declaration, and the WTO were created. There are 6 main goals of the WTO: administering WTO trade agreements, a forum for trade negotiations, handling trade disputes, monitoring national trade policies, technical assistance and training for developing countries, and cooperation with other international organizations. The WTO covers everything from goods to services and intellectual property as well. Within the WTO, there are 164 current members as well as 22 observers. Any state or customs territory who has full conduct of its trade policies can accede to the WTO. There is a 4-step process for the application. Step 1, you have to tell the WTO members about yourself. The government must describe all aspects of its trade and economic policies that may deal with WTO agreements. And all of this is given to the working party to examine. Then you have to work out what you have to offer. Talks begin with individual countries within the WTO to determine benefits other members can expect when the new member joins. The commitments are to apply equally to all members. Next, you must draft membership terms. Once the examination of the applicant's trade deals is completed and the negotiations are completed, they finalize terms which appear in a report and a draft membership treaty. Finally, the final package is presented to the WTO General Council or the Ministerial Conference, and a 2/3 vote is all that is needed to be able to sign the protocol. So any of the observers that are members, they must start the accession negotiations within 5 years of becoming observers. The map points out that there are 5 non-members, including North Korea and Greenland, Turkmenistan. Research has shown that a lot of issues standing in the way of non-members is meeting the criteria that you need to have, so like matching. So this means like matching your trade and economic policies to that of the WTO. And along with that, usually the long wait that happens while all this is going on is a barrier to some. The budget and funding. So the 2018 budget for the WTO was just over 197 million Swiss francs. Most of the budget comes from member contributions, which is based off their percentage of global trade. So this means that the United States and China, which are both members, seeing that they are the 2 biggest economies as well as the 2 biggest trading nations, they also pay the most money in contributions, with the United States paying almost 12% and China paying almost 10%. The rest of the budget comes from the money they make off their publications, which is another slide, and the trust funds that have been set up by contributing members. So, the WTO is run by its member governments. All major decisions are made by the membership as a whole, either by ministers who meet at least once every 2 years at the ministerial conferences, or by their ambassadors or delegates who meet regularly in Geneva. Decisions are normally taken by consensus. In the WTO, power is not delegated to a board of directors or the organization's head. So reaching decisions among 150 members can be difficult. Its main advantage is that when decisions are made this way, usually they are more acceptable to all members. There have been some proposals for creation of a smaller executive body, like a board of directors, but for now, the WTO is still member driven. So as I mentioned, the WTO belongs to its members, and the countries make their decisions through various councils and committees, which consists of all of the WTO members. So the topmost decision body are the ministerial conferences, which meet at least, it's supposed to be at least once every 2 years. The last one was in 2017. The next one isn't until 2020. And the ministerial conferences can make decisions on all matters under any of the multilateral trade agreements. The next level down from that is the General Council. So that's like the day-to-day work in between the ministerial conferences. And for that, there's three bodies: the General Council, the Dispute Settlement Body, and the Trade Policy Review Body. All three of them are the General Council. They're just meeting under different terms of reference. And they all consist of all the WTO members, and they report to the ministerial conference. So the General Council will act on behalf of the ministerial conference on all World Trade Organization affairs, and they will meet either as the dispute settlement body or the trade policy review body to oversee procedures for settling disputes between their members, or to analyze members' trade policies. There's a level below that. There are councils for each broad area of trade and more. So for that, you have three more councils: the Council for Trade in Goods, Council for Trade in Services, and the Council for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, TRIPS Council. They are responsible for the workings of the WTO agreements dealing with their respective areas of trade. Again, they consist of all WTO members, and from there are subsidiary bodies, which are other bodies that report to the General Council. They are just considered committees. Their scope of coverage is smaller, but they still consist of all WTO members. From there, it gets broken down more to more subsidiary bodies, and then there's a fourth level, which the WTO website pointed out as down to the nitty-gritty. So each of those higher level councils has other subsidiary bodies. So like the Goods Council has 11 committees dealing with specific subjects like agriculture or subsidies. Again, these consist of all member countries. In the end, it's just important to note that the top decision body is the ministerial conference, and below that, everything deals with the day-to-day operations of all the trade deals. So along with all this, there is the WTO Secretariat, whose offices are in Geneva, and there are 625 regular staff, which is headed by the Director General. The main duties are to supply technical and professional support for the various councils and committees, and to provide technical assistance for developing countries. They will also provide some legal assistance, but they don't have any real powers outside of that. Because as we mentioned, the WTO is a member-driven, consensus-based organization. So there are three main publications, which, as we mentioned, they make some of their money off of these. So there's the World Trade Statistical Review, which provides a detailed analysis of developments in world trade, which is produced annually. The World Trade Report is written in the hopes of helping people better understand trends in trade trade policy, trade issues, and the trade system. This is also produced annually. And then the final is the annual report, which is a summary of the WTO's activities over the past year, including the structure, staff, and budget. So, as mentioned in the beginning, the WTO's headquarters are in Switzerland. There aren't any field offices, but they do hold their ministerial conferences in different countries like the US, Singapore, and China. Finally, on to the relevance today. So for this, I looked at Brexit, which we've all heard about in the news, and if any of you are also in the political turbulence class, we did a week on this. So every WTO member has a list of tariffs, which are taxes on imports of goods, and quotas, which is limits on the number of goods that they apply to other countries. So if the UK left the EU, it would automatically fall back into the WTO rules. It is important to note that the WTO has a non-discrimination clause, meaning that you cannot offer a better deal to one country over another unless you have another agreement with said country. So like the EU, they have different agreements with the countries inside their group that they offer only to each other and not to other countries, which under the WTO is okay because of their EU deal. So what this means is that at the bare minimum, you have to follow the WTO rules, but you can build upon them. So if the UK were to leave the EU, it would things would change a lot for the UK. Currently, the UK has a tariff-free deal with the EU, and along with that, under the EU, it has 40 free trade deals with over 70 other countries like Canada. This means it does not have to pay taxes on the imports of most goods. On top of that, the EU also accounts for almost half of the UK exports, while other countries like the US only account for about 20%. So if the UK were to leave the EU, most of those deals would go away and it would go back to the bare minimum deals that the WTO has. So it will still be able to trade with other members of the WTO because the UK is a part of it outside of the EU, but it wouldn't have any of the EU deals, so all the tariff-free trade deals that the EU has with those 70 countries, the UK wouldn't have unless they got continuity deals, which so far the UK has signed 18 continuity deals that cover about 40 countries, but that's only about 10% of UK trade. And the countries it has are like Morocco or Georgia, Tunisia, Lebanon, South Korea. And this is actually where the WTO comes in. It gives the UK a forum to negotiate these deals, as well as what Deputy General Alan Wolf points out. The fact is that the UK is an original member of the GATT and therefore of the WTO. It will participate fully either through the European Union as it does presently or by itself. What the Brexit demonstrates is that the WTO rules and commitments are an essential safety net. Without it, the UK, absent a large number of bilateral or regional agreements, would have no rights if its trade were curtailed. discriminated again by any country. So, what the Brexit situation points out in terms of relevance for the WTO is that, like Deputy General Alan Wolf points out, it is a safety net for countries. So if, another country leaves the EU, or if one were to leave NAFTA, there are still deals in place that allow them to freely trade with countries and to not be discriminated against. So what one country like the United States were to offer a country like Morocco, it has to offer to every other country. On top of that, it allows a forum to make other trade deals so that you can make sure that your businesses and your citizens are getting their best deals. Plus, the bodies within the WTO, like the Secretariat, offer help and guidance so that you can make sure you are making the best deals that you can. Anyway, that is my presentation on the WTO, and here's a list of some of the references I used.